All right, this video begins the ecology unit in AP Biology. We'll be looking first at some basics of ecology, and then we'll be getting more and more into the depths of things as we go along. So what is ecology? Ecology is the study of interactions between organisms and their environment. You can see here a picture of some different animals and things that are going on. You get the watering hole and the rocks and the water and the temperature and the trees in the background. We call these things the abiotic and biotic factors. The abiotic factors being the non-living, the biotic being the living. Abiotic factors go way beyond just rocks, which tend to be our favorite one to mention. But these are things like temperature, the availability of water and an animal's ability to keep that water in, sunlight, wind, pH in the soil. There are lots of different types of abiotic factors that can go into this. And of course, then the living things, which includes the plants. Plants are indeed living. So next, this concept of biogeography, which features very important into the study of ecology. This is the distribution of species across the world in different patterns. See, this is a picture of the different types of crocodiles that exist all over the world, and you can see there is generally a pattern to them. They are located closer to the equator in the warmer regions of the world, though they can go up pretty far north. That seems really far north um, for alligators, but maybe they go up there. But you get the idea. There's general patterns to how species are dispersed. Which leads me to the next ideas, which is species richness. Species richness has to do with the number of different species within an area. And this particular graph shows you the darker colors more toward red has a high amount of species richness, which is what you would expect to see in areas that have lots and lots of energy, like rainforests and that sort of thing. Whereas in areas that have lower energy are going to have lower richness. So there may be many different kinds of species that live in a particular area. These could be normal species, and a normal species are indigenous or native to an area, meaning they evolved there. They are particularly adapted to the different things that are going on in that place. But then you can also have a transplant species, and this is a species that was brought there for some other reason, accidentally or on purpose, whatever. This is a picture of a starling. Starlings were brought to the United States early on, and they were brought here because they were in one of Shakespeare's poems, and the people that made Central Park, New York, wanted two of every bird in Shakespeare's poems. And so they started with two starlings, and now they are all over the place. So that would be an example of an accidental kind of transplant. They didn't really think that it was going to do what happened. Maybe you could say it was on purpose, but there is a difference there. On the left, you have zebra mussels, and they're definitely considered an accidental transplant because they were brought over in boats and things from over the seas, and they get here and they really like living in this part of the world instead of where they are originally from, and they've done quite well, and they've caused quite a bit of problems. And so some transplant species can be what is considered an invasive species or a pest, whereas some, here's a couple others. This is a kudzu. Kudzu is something that was brought on purpose to control erosion, and now it controls everything. Killer bees were kind of accidental on purpose as well, and they've slowly made their march north from South America. I think they're here now. It was kind of anticlimactic with them, but there's a rule with transplant species. It's called the rule of tens, whereas 1 in 10 transplants will be successful, and then 1 in 10 of those successful transplants will become a pest or kind of an invasive species. So moving on, just a real quick review here, but climate versus weather. Weather is short-term state, as you can see here on this picture. This is, you go outside, you can see what the weather is. It can change rapidly, whereas climate is more of something that is happening over time. It is an average. It is slow to change. It's hard to change the climate of an area, whereas weather may change between the different hours or minutes of the day. Biomes are these are large ecosystems, large areas that have the same kinds of similar climates and different communities, the living things that live there. And biomes are largely decided by a couple of factors. They are largely decided by elevation and latitude. And you can kind of see this. Latitude are the lines that run crossways on the map like this. And so you can kind of see how the different biomes generally follow those lines. You know, like here's the Sahara Desert, the rainforest is near the equator, and so forth. You get the idea. There is a particular model that is used to talk about why this is, and it's called the Hadley Model. And the Hadley Model can be a little bit more complex, but it's the basic idea is that air is going from the equator toward the poles, versus, whereas it could be going towards the North Pole or the South Pole. And moisture, when it goes up, it eventually will condense and come back down. So if you know those two things, you can kind of get the idea. So basically, if you think about the equator, what's going on at the equator? Lots of temperature and lots of rain. And the reason that is because the rain evaporates up, goes straight up, and before it can get north and south of these tropics, these lines here that are called the tropics. Generally, it's a little bit further south than that. It's about right here. Before it can get further north or south, all of that rain is gone. And so then what happens when you get into those regions that are just, so if this is the equator here-ish, and once you get north and south of those areas, what do you have where there's still lots of sun, but not very much rain? You have these desert regions of the world that are just dry and barren and have no rain at all. But what little moisture there is in those areas, it goes up and collects, and as the air continues to move toward the poles, that air is going to travel up and then is going to again begin raining down on these areas like where we live and the other temperate areas of the world. And the same pattern continues. When you go further north, there's no more moisture, but there's also no sun. And so then what you have is a kind of polar desert. And so that's the Hadley model, largely determines the biomes. Now, elevation can completely rearrange that. Mountains tend to tend to trick climate because you can be in the middle of a really warm area, but really high up, and there'll be snow on the ground. And so that tends to uh, disobey the rules of latitude, but it's a similar kind of thing. And so mountains can also affect the amount of moisture, whereas the side that is, so if the moisture is moving off of the ocean towards the mountain, this side of the mountain is going to receive all the moisture because the moisture has to go upward, and once it gets upward, it rains down. And so then on the other side of the mountain, what you end up having is nothing. And you see this in like California, where on one side of the mountains you have these lush green areas where lots of produce and lots of agriculture, and right on the other side of the mountains you have places called Death Valley. And so it is the mountains can cause a vast change in the climate. So a little bit about lakes. Lakes form layers called clines, and these clines are based on the temperature of the water. So you'll see them called thermoclines as well. And in the winter and in the summer, as you can see here, the lake is very has lots of levels to it. If you've been swimming in a lake in the summer, you know this. You dive down too deep, and it's really cold down there because the water in the summer is really cold, whereas on top it's warm because of the sun. Well, what happens as the temperature outside starts to cool? This water on the surface of the lake is also going to cool, and as you move into autumn, the water in the entire lake is the same temperature. This allows the lake to cycle. It almost like turns itself over. This is a very healthy process for a lake. But as winter moves into, the surface actually is really cold, and the bottom is going to be warmer. So it's kind of the opposite of the summer. And then in the spring, that same turnover happens again. There can be conditions that would actually cause lakes to not do this, depending on the nutrient content and the amount of oxygen in those lakes. It could cause those lakes to not do this, which is actually not very good for a lake.